HOA Stories Part 1. The first strike, the morning Barbara Cunningham drove her pearl-white Mercedes up. My mountain road was the morning my peaceful life ended. I watched from my workshop window as her vehicle struggled up the steep grade, clearly not built for Colorado backcountry terrain. It was 7:15 in the morning, and I'd already been awake for 2 hours, working on a custom furniture order in my barn workshop. The smell of fresh-cut cedar filled the air, mixing with the scent of morning coffee and mountain pine. That smell of cedar would forever remind me of the moment before everything changed. I'm Marcus Riley, and I'd moved to the Rockwood Valley in western Colorado 3 years earlier, inheriting 4,200 acres from my Uncle Thomas. Uncle Thomas had purchased this land back in March 1960, $1,200 for an entire mountain range. The purchase included everything: timber rights, mineral rights, water rights, and something called perpetual development easements that I didn't fully understand at the time. Uncle Thomas had been a shrewd businessman who understood that true wealth wasn't just in owning land, but in controlling what could be done with the land around yours. After burning out from 15 years as a software architect in Silicon Valley, I'd embraced the mountain life completely. My cabin sat at 8,700 feet elevation, a 1,500 square foot A-frame I'd renovated myself, using reclaimed timber and modern off-grid technology. Solar panels on the south-facing roof, rainwater collection system, geothermal heating, and a root cellar that kept food fresh year-round without electricity. I ran a custom furniture business online, shipping handcrafted pieces to clients across the country. Life was simple, honest, and exactly what I needed. But then came Barbara Cunningham and Rockwood Highlands, her luxury development project. She'd started building 2 years ago, carving 28 lots out of the lower valley and selling them for prices ranging from $650,000 to $1,200,000 each. Each home had to be at least 3,000 square feet, had to use approved architectural styles, and had to maintain community standards that seemed designed to squeeze every drop of individuality out of the neighborhood. Barbara herself was 56 years old, with professionally highlighted hair that probably cost more per month than most people's car payments. She drove that Mercedes like it was a tank, wore heels that clicked on pavement like a judge's gavel, and had a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was both the developer and the HOA president, which should have been everyone's first warning sign. But people saw those glossy brochures and architectural renderings and signed away their freedom without reading the fine print. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday in May 2024, delivered by certified mail. The envelope was thick, expensive paper that felt like silk between my fingers. Inside was 3 pages of legal threats wrapped in corporate language. Barbara's HOA was demanding that I bring my property into compliance with community standards or face fines of $850 per day. $850 per day for a cabin that had existed since 1973, built by my uncle's own hands, standing strong for over 50 years. The specific violations listed were absurd. My metal roof was aesthetically incompatible. My solar panels were visually obtrusive. My workshop barn was an unpermitted commercial structure. My vegetable garden was agricultural use in a residential zone. Even my split-rail fence, weathered and honest, was cited as not meeting subdivision standards. Everything that made my property functional and sustainable was suddenly a violation. I called the number on the letterhead, expecting to clear up what was obviously a mistake. Barbara answered on the second ring, her voice syrupy, sweet, and completely fake. "Mr. Riley, so good to hear from you. I hope you received our compliance notice." The way she said compliance notice made it sound like a death sentence wrapped in politeness. "Mrs. Cunningham," I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger building in my chest, "there must be some mistake. My property isn't part of your HOA. My uncle bought this land and your development didn't exist until 2022. There was a pause on the line, filled with the sound of her perfectly manicured nails tapping on a desk. "Mr. Riley, the Rockwood Highlands HOA has jurisdiction over all properties that benefit from community improvements. Your property clearly benefits from our road maintenance and aesthetic standards. The absurdity of her claim would have been funny if it wasn't so threatening. My property was accessed by the same county road that had existed for 80 years. I maintained my own driveway. I didn't use any HOA services, but Barbara had found some obscure legal theory that if your property was within the viewst of HOA properties, you could be subject to their rules. It was like claiming you could control your neighbor's house because you could see it from your window. Her first inspection visit came 3 days later. I heard the Mercedes struggling up my driveway at 9:30 in the morning, followed by the clicking of those ridiculous heels on my gravel path. Barbara emerged from her car wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost $3,000 and shoes that had no business being anywhere near dirt. Behind her came a nervous-looking man with a clipboard. Her assistant, or inspector, or whatever role she'd invented to intimidate property owners. "Mr. Riley," she announced, not bothering with pleasantries. "I'm here to conduct the initial compliance assessment." She stood at the edge of my porch, looking at my cabin the way someone might look at a condemned building. Her nose wrinkled slightly at the smell of wood smoke from my chimney, mixing with the sawdust sent from my workshop. Everything about her body language screamed that she found my entire existence offensive. "This structure is completely inappropriate for the Rockwood Highlands aesthetic," she declared, her assistant frantically scribbling notes. "The metal roofing, the exposed timber, the complete lack of architectural coherence. It's dragging down property values for the entire community." I stood in my doorway, coffee cup in hand, and just stared at her. "Signorin Cunningham, with all due respect, my cabin was built before most of your homeowners were born, and it's not part of your community." Her smile tightened, becoming more like a grimace. "We'll let the courts decide that, Mr. Riley. In the meantime, you have 30 days to begin remediation, or the fines start accruing." She turned on her heel, nearly twisting her ankle on the uneven ground, and marched back to her car. The Mercedes spun its wheels in my gravel, throwing rocks as she accelerated down the driveway. The smell of her expensive perfume lingered in the mountain air long after she left, an artificial scent that seemed to poison the natural pine fragrance. I spent that afternoon researching property law. My coffee growing cold as I dug through county records and legal documents. What I found was frustrating but not entirely hopeless. Barbara's HOA had indeed filed documents claiming jurisdiction over adjacent and viewshed properties, but these claims were legally dubious. Uncle Thomas's original deed clearly predated any HOA restrictions, and property rights in Colorado generally favored existing uses over new restrictions. But Barbara wasn't interested in legal niceties. If she couldn't force me out through HOA rules, she'd find other methods. The harassment campaign began in earnest the following week. Anonymous complaints to the county about unpermitted structures. A surprise visit from the health department investigating reports of illegal sewage disposal. The fire marshal showed up to inspect my wood stove after receiving concerns about fire hazards. Each visit required hours of my time, documentation, and explanations. The county inspector, a weathered man named Tom Crawford with 30 years of experience, walked through my cabin, shaking his head. "Marcus, I'm sorry about this. Your place is built better than half the new construction, I see. Someone's clearly got it out for you." He photographed everything, documented that all my systems were legal and properly installed, and told me off the record that he'd received similar bogus complaints about 2 other properties in the valley. All properties that Barbara wanted for her expansion plans. The health department visit was even more revealing. The inspector tested my well water, examined my septic system, and checked my food storage. Everything passed with flying colors. "Your water quality is actually better than the municipal supply in town," she told me, reviewing the test results. Whoever called this in was either lying or completely ignorant about off-grid systems. When I asked if she could tell me who filed the complaint, she hesitated. "I can't officially say, but the call came from a Boulder area code and the caller identified herself as concerned citizen from Rockwood Highlands. Fire Marshal Janet Rodriguez was the most sympathetic of all. She'd grown up in the valley, remembered Uncle Thomas, and was clearly annoyed at having her time wasted. "Your installation is textbook perfect," she said, after inspecting my wood stove and chimney. "Clearances exceed code by 6 inches, proper air supply, professional installation. Whoever complained about this has never seen an actual fire hazard. She paused at the door before leaving. Off the record, Barbara Cunningham has filed complaints about 7 properties in the past 6 months. All of them just happened to be in the path of her expansion plans. That evening, sitting on my porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, I realized this wasn't just about my cabin. Barbara was running a systematic campaign to force out anyone who stood in the way of her development ambitions. She was using government agencies as weapons, filing bogus complaints to harass and intimidate. The question was, how many people had already given up and sold out under this pressure? I started asking questions around the valley, at Maria's Caf, the local breakfast spot that had been serving mountain folk since 1976. I found answers I didn't want to hear. Old Roger Patterson, who'd lived in the valley for 40 years, had sold his property to Barbara for barely half its value after 6 months of harassment. "I'm 78 years old," he told me over coffee, his hands shaking slightly. I couldn't fight her anymore. The lawyers, the inspections, the threatening letters. She broke me down. Jennifer and Mike Santos had a similar story. Barbara had targeted their small ranch, filing complaints about everything from their livestock to their fences to their water use. "We spent $20,000 on lawyers and improvements we didn't need." Jennifer sighed, her voice bitter. "Finally just sold to her for what we'd paid 15 years ago. She got our 40 acres for less than one of her empty lots sells for." But it was Sarah Chun, the local real estate agent who'd been in the valley for 20 years, who gave me the big picture. "Barbara has a pattern," Sarah explained, spreading out a map of the valley on her desk. "She identifies properties she wants for expansion, then makes the owners' lives hell until they sell. She uses HOA threats, government complaints, even social pressure. She's acquired 12 properties this way in the past 3 years, always paying below market value because the owners are desperate to escape." The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just personal harassment. This was a calculated business strategy. And I was just the latest target. Barbara had perfected a system of legal bullying that most people couldn't afford to fight. Most people didn't have Uncle Thomas's foresight or the financial cushion to hire lawyers and fight back. Most people eventually broke under the pressure and sold out. But I wasn't most people, and Barbara Cunningham was about to discover that she'd picked the wrong person to intimidate, because Uncle Thomas hadn't just left me land. He'd left me leverage. I just didn't know it. Yeah, the second wave of attacks came with precision timing. Barbara's lawyer sent a formal demand letter threatening immediate legal action if I didn't comply with HOA standards within 14 days. The letter arrived on expensive letterhead, written in language designed to intimidate rather than inform. It claimed damages of $65,000 for aesthetic pollution and property value reduction, affecting the entire Rockwood Highlands community. The same day, I received a notice from the county zoning department claiming my workshop was an illegal commercial operation. Someone had reported seeing delivery trucks at my property, suggesting I was running a business without proper permits. The notice demanded I cease all commercial activities, or face fines of $500 per day. The irony was almost funny. I did run a business, but it was completely legal under county regulations for home-based enterprises. Time to lawyer up. I called my college roommate David Jung, who'd gone from pre-law to environmental law to representing rural landowners against corporate development. When I explained the situation, his response was immediate and enthusiastic. "Marcus, this is exactly the kind of case I live for. Send me everything you have." Within 3 days, David had reviewed all the documents and given me news that made my morning coffee taste like victory. "Your uncle was brilliant," David said over our video call. "These property rights are ironclad. Not only is your property completely outside Barbara's HOA jurisdiction, but you actually have some rights that might surprise you. Give me a week to dig deeper into the county records. I think Uncle Thomas left you more than just land." His grin was predatory, and I felt a surge of hope for the first time since this nightmare began. While David researched, I documented everything. Security cameras at every angle of my property, motion activated and recording in high definition. A detailed log of every complaint, every inspection, every threatening letter. I bought a professional-grade voice recorder for any future interactions with Barbara or her representatives. If this was going to become a legal battle, I wanted evidence that would bury her. The breakthrough came on a Friday evening. David called, his excitement palpable even over the phone. "Marcus, sit down. You're not going to believe what I found in the county archives." The records he'd discovered were from yellowed paper and faded ink that told a story I'd never known. Uncle Thomas hadn't just bought land. He'd bought power. The evening light was fading as I listened to David explain what he'd found. Barbara's harassment suddenly made perfect sense. She wasn't just trying to expand her development. She was trying to acquire rights that Uncle Thomas had locked down decades ago. Rights that would make or break her entire project. The pieces were falling into place, and I was beginning to understand why Barbara was so desperate to force me out. As darkness settled over the valley, I stood on my porch, looking down at the lights of Rockwood Highlands twinkling in the distance. Barbara Cunningham thought she was hunting me. She had no idea that the tables were about to turn. To be continued in Part 2. HOA Stories Part 2. The hidden power David Jung arrived at my cabin on a Monday morning, carrying 2 boxers filled with documents that would change everything. He'd driven through the night from Denver, and his excitement was visible, despite the exhaustion. I cleared the dining table, made fresh coffee, and watched as he arranged stacks of papers and legal documents. "Marcus, your uncle was a genius," David began, spreading out a yellowed property survey from March 19. "When he bought this land for $1,200, he didn't just buy surface rights, he bought everything." His finger traced lines on the old map, mineral rights under 3,000 acres, including most of Barbara's development, water rights from the headwaters that feed the entire valley, and development easements that give you veto power over any major construction within 5 miles. The implications hit me like a landslide. Barbara's entire development was built on land where I controlled the mineral rights. Every house, every road, every utility line was technically built over resources I owned, and the water rights were even more devastating to her plans. The creek that ran through Rockwood Highlands originated from springs on my property. Without my permission, she couldn't legally guarantee water access to her future expansion phases. But why didn't anyone know about this? I asked, trying to process the magnitude of what David was showing me. How could Barbara build an entire development without discovering these restrictions? David pulled out another document, this one more recent. "Because your uncle's estate attorney died in December 2017, and the new attorney who took over the practice never fully reviewed the property documents. The county records are scattered across 3 different filing systems, some dating back to territorial days. Barbara's title company did a standard search, but missed the mineral rights filing because it was cross-referenced under an old survey number." David showed me the development easement document, handwritten on paper so old it crumbled slightly at the edges. Uncle Thomas had included a clause that gave him and his heirs the right to approve or reject any development project that would materially alter the watershed, viewshed, or ecological character of the Rockwood Valley. It was environmental protection written into property law, decades before such concerns became mainstream. "This is why Barbara has been so aggressive," David explained. "She needs your land not just for expansion, but because without your approval, her existing development might face legal challenges. If you want it to be difficult, you could argue that her Phase 1 construction violated these easements." We spent the next hours going through every document. Uncle Thomas's purchase had included rights to 7 water sources, mineral rights under 4,800 acres, and timber rights on 6,000 acres. The total value was staggering. David estimated the mineral rights alone were worth between $3 and $8 million. The water rights in drought-prone Colorado were potentially even more valuable. "Here's the nuclear option," David said, pulling out a financial document he'd obtained through legal discovery. Barbara's development company took out a $2 million construction loan in March 2022. The loan was secured using her properties as collateral, and she represented to the bank that her development had unrestricted expansion potential. If the bank discovers that you control critical rights to her expansion plans, they could call the loan due immediately for material misrepresentation. His smile was wolfish, and according to county records, She's already missed 2 monthly payments. The puzzle pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Barbara wasn't just being aggressive because she wanted my land. She was desperate because her entire financial house of cards was collapsing, and my property rights were the pin holding everything together. If I refused to cooperate, her expansion plans failed. If her expansion plans failed, she couldn't generate the revenue to service her debt. If she defaulted on her loan, the bank would foreclose on everything. She was trapped, and attacking me was her desperate attempt to break free. "What do you want to do?" David asked, gathering the documents back into organized stacks. "We could demand she'd drop all complaints and pay your legal fees in exchange for not challenging her existing development. Or we could play hardball, file our own complaints about her HOA overreach, and force her into bankruptcy. Or something in between." I looked out my window at the valley below, the morning sun painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber. This wasn't just about revenge or winning a legal battle. This was about protecting something Uncle Thomas had preserved for over 50 years. "Let's start by making sure she knows what she's up against," Primera sighed slowly. "But let's not reveal everything at once. I want to see how desperate she gets before we show our full hand." David nodded, understanding immediately. "Strategic disclosure. Let her dig herself deeper while we build an ironclad case." "I like it. But Marcus, be prepared. When desperate people realize they're losing, they often escalate in dangerous ways." David's warning proved prophetic within 48 hours. Barbara's next move was to file an emergency injunction claiming that my unlawful occupation of disputed property posed an immediate threat to community safety. The filing was ridiculous on its face, claiming that my wood smoke from morning fires was a health hazard, that my workshop noise disturbed residents 3 miles away, and that my presence was causing psychological distress to homeowners who could see my cabin from their properties. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning at 9 o'clock in the county courthouse. Barbara showed up with 2 lawyers, both wearing suits that probably cost more than my truck. I came with David and 3 cardboard boxers of evidence. Judge Patricia Morrison, a no-nonsense woman in her early 60s who'd been on the bench for 20 years, looked distinctly unimpressed with the entire proceeding before it even started. Barbara's lead attorney, Bradford Pierce, spent 20 minutes arguing that my property was part of the HOA jurisdiction. He cited cases from 3 states, none applicable to Colorado law. Judge Morrison listened with increasing impatience. When Pierce finished, she turned to David. "Counselor, your response?" David stood, and his presentation was devastating in its simplicity. He entered Uncle Thomas's original deed into evidence, showing the property was purchased 24 years before Barbara's development was even conceived. He presented statements from the county inspector, the health department, and the fire marshal, all confirming that my property met or exceeded every legal requirement. Then came the coup de grace. He introduced the mineral rights documents and development easement, proving that I didn't just own my property, I had legal authority over significant aspects of Barbara's development. "Your Honor," David concluded, "Ms. Cunningham's emergency injunction is not about legitimate safety concerns. It's about intimidating a property owner who has legal rights that interfere with her business plans. This court should not allow itself to be used as a weapon in a real estate dispute." Judge Morrison didn't even pretend to deliberate. Injunction denied. "Ms. Cunningham, I'm warning you about filing frivolous motions in my courtroom." "Mr. Riley, you're entitled to attorney's fees for this hearing. We're adjourned." Barbara's face cycled through shock, rage, and something that looked like panic as the judge's gavel fell. Her lawyers hustled her out of the courtroom before she could say something that would make things worse. But I caught her expression as she glanced back at me from the doorway. It wasn't the look of someone who'd been defeated. It was the look of someone preparing to escalate. That afternoon, I decided it was time to build a coalition. If Barbara had been systematically targeting property owners throughout the valley, then I wasn't the only one with grievances. I needed to find the others, share information, and build a unified resistance. My first stop was Maria's Calf, where Sarah Chun had agreed to meet me with a list of property owners who'd had conflicts with Barbara. The list was longer than I'd expected. 14 property owners, in the past 3 years, all facing similar patterns of harassment. Some had sold out and left the valley. Others were still fighting but exhausted and financially drained. Sarah had done remarkable detective work, tracking down people who'd left and documenting their experiences. The thing is, Sarah explained over coffee and pie, Barbara's tactics follow a pattern. First, she identifies a property she wants. Then she files bogus HOA complaints or uses her connections to trigger government inspections. She wears people down with legal fees and stress until they're desperate to sell. Then she swoops in with a lowball offer. We started making calls. Roger Pedersen was bitter but willing to document his experience. She destroyed my retirement, he said. I bought that land in 1998. Planned to pass it to my grandkids. She forced me out. He agreed to sign an affidavit detailing Barbara's harassment and the predatory price she'd paid. Jennifer and Mike Santos still lived in the valley after being forced to sell their ranch. They'd kept meticulous records. We spent $23,000 fighting her, Jennifer sighed. Legal fees, improvements, reports. She paid us $450,000 for land appraised at $720,000. But the most shocking revelation came from Tom Chun, Sarah's brother and a forensic accountant who specialized in real estate fraud. Tom had been quietly investigating Barbara's financial dealings for months, initially at the request of a client who'd been defrauded in a land deal. What he'd discovered was a web of financial manipulation that made her harassment campaign look almost innocent by comparison. Barbara's been running a real estate Ponzi scheme, Tom explained, showing complex spreadsheets. She uses revenue from new lot sales to cover earlier phase expenses. She's leveraged to about 230% of actual equity. He pulled up another document, and she's been embezzling HOA dues, $78,000 over 18 months. David Young reviewed Tom's findings with the intensity of a prosecutor who'd just found the smoking gun. This is criminal fraud. Embezzlement, loan fraud, potentially RICO violations, if we can prove the systematic nature of her harassment campaign. Marcus, you're not just fighting a difficult neighbor. You're up against someone who's committed serious crimes and has everything to lose if she's exposed. We spent the next week building a comprehensive case file. Tom's financial analysis showed exactly how Barbara's scheme worked. Sarah documented every property acquisition and the pattern of harassment that preceded each sale. David compiled legal violations from HOA governance rules to state fraud statutes. Roger, Jennifer, Mike, and 3 other former property owners provided sworn affidavits detailing their experiences. By Friday evening, we had enough evidence to destroy Barbara's business and potentially put her in prison. But I wasn't interested in immediate destruction. I wanted strategic leverage. Barbara didn't know yet what we'd discovered, and her ignorance was our advantage. Let her keep escalating, I suggested during our strategy session at my cabin. Every move she makes adds to our evidence file. When we finally reveal what we know, it'll be so comprehensive that she won't have any defense. David agreed, but added a warning. The more desperate she gets, the more dangerous this becomes. We need to be prepared for her to do something reckless. People who are cornered sometimes make very bad decisions. His words would prove prophetic sooner than any of us expected. Barbara's next move came on a Sunday evening, and it crossed a line that changed everything. I was in my workshop, finishing a custom table order, when my motion sensors triggered. Through my security camera feeds, I watched a white Mercedes pull onto the county road near my property entrance. Barbara sat in the driver's seat, talking on her phone, her face illuminated by the screen glow. She wasn't trying to hide. She wanted me to know she was there. Over the next hour, she drove past 3 more times. On the 4th pass, a black SUV joined her. They parked at my driveway's end, engines running. The message was clear. Intimidation. I called the sheriff's department. Deputy Rodriguez arrived 20 minutes later. By then, both vehicles had left, but I had high-definition footage of everything. This is stalking behavior, Marcus Deputy Rodriguez said, reviewing the footage on my computer. I can't arrest her based on this alone, but if it continues, we can pursue harassment charges. Make sure you keep documenting everything. He paused at the door before leaving. Off the record, Barbara Cunningham has been on our radar for a while. This isn't the first complaint we've had about her intimidation tactics. The surveillance continued for 3 more nights. Always the Mercedes, sometimes accompanied by the black SUV. Never doing anything overtly illegal, but clearly meant to intimidate. I enhanced my security system, adding more cameras, motion-activated lights, and an alarm system connected directly to the sheriff's department. If Barbara wanted to play psychological warfare, I'd make sure every move was documented in high definition. But the real escalation came Thursday morning. I woke to find my driveway blocked by rocks and debris dumped overnight. My mailbox was knocked over, leaves spray-painted in red across my workshop door. My security cameras caught everything. The footage showed 2 men in a pickup truck, their license plate clearly visible in the infrared camera view. They worked quickly, dumping the rocks, knocking over the mailbox, spray-painting the door. The truck belonged to one of Barbara's construction subcontractors, a fact easily verified through county vehicle registration records. Barbara herself never appeared on camera, but the connection was undeniable. She'd hired thugs to do her dirty work. Deputy Rodriguez returned with 2 other officers and a very serious expression. "Marcus, this has escalated to criminal vandalism and possibly conspiracy to commit harassment. We're going to have a conversation with Ms. Cunningham." They left with copies of my security footage, and I could tell from their faces that Barbara had just crossed a line that even her lawyers wouldn't be able to smooth over. I called David immediately. His response was explosive. "She hired people to vandalize your property. Marcus, this is perfect. Well, not perfect for you, but legally speaking, this gives us everything we need. Criminal charges, civil liability, proof of harassment pattern. She's handed us a gift." His excitement was palpable. "I'm going to file a comprehensive lawsuit tomorrow morning. Harassment, property damage, abuse of legal process, fraud, and I'm going to include a motion for emergency protective order, keeping her away from your property." That evening, as I cleaned red paint off my workshop door, I felt something shift. This wasn't just about defending my property anymore. Barbara's criminal escalation had transformed this from a property dispute into something much larger. She'd revealed herself as not just aggressive, but dangerous, and dangerous people needed to be stopped before they hurt someone. The trap was set. Barbara had no idea that every attack, every threat, every illegal act was just adding weight to a legal avalanche that would soon bury her. The question now wasn't if she would fall, but how far and how hard. To be continued in Part 3. HOA Stories Part 3. The unraveling the sheriff's department moved faster than I expected. By Tuesday afternoon, both men who'd vandalized my property were in custody, and their statements implicated Barbara directly. She'd paid them $1,500 cash to send a message to the troublemaker on the mountain. What Barbara didn't know was that one of the men had kept text messages showing her instructions, complete with photos of my property and specific directions on what to damage. David filed our comprehensive lawsuit Wednesday morning. The complaint was 73 pages of meticulously documented allegations. Harassment, stalking, property damage, conspiracy, abuse of legal process, fraud, embezzlement, and RICO violations. We attached over 200 exhibits, including security footage, financial records, sworn affidavits from former property owners, and Tom Chun's forensic accounting analysis. The filing fee alone was $2,800, but it was worth every penny. Barbara was served at her office Thursday morning. According to the process server, she turned white while reading the first page, then started shaking by page 10. She immediately called her attorney, Bradford Pierce, who arrived within the hour, looking significantly less confident than he had at our last court appearance. By afternoon, the local newspaper had gotten wind of the lawsuit, and by Friday morning, it was front-page news. The headline read, "Local developer faces fraud and harassment charges." The article detailed Barbara's systematic campaign against property owners, her financial irregularities, and the criminal charges stemming from the vandalism incident. The reporter had done excellent work, interviewing Roger Patterson, Jennifer, and Mike Santos, and 3 other families who'd been driven out of the valley. By Friday afternoon, Barbara's world was collapsing in real time. The HOA residents of Rockwood Highlands started asking questions. Why were their dues so high when common areas weren't being maintained? Were at $78,000 of their money gone? Why was their HOA president being sued for fraud? An emergency HOA meeting was called for Saturday evening, and the attendance was mandatory. I wasn't technically invited, but Sarah Chun was representing several concerned residents, and she made sure I knew exactly what was happening. The meeting was chaos. Barbara tried to maintain control, standing at the podium with her usual commanding presence, but her voice wavered when residents started demanding answers. James Richardson, a retired attorney who'd bought into the development the previous year, stood up with a stack of financial documents. Senora. Cunningham, I've reviewed the HOA budget and expense reports. There are discrepancies totaling over $90,000. Can you explain where this money went? Barbara's face flushed. Those are administrative expenses and legal fees defending the HOA against frivolous complaints. James wasn't satisfied. Administrative expenses don't include personal credit card payments, luxury car leases, and spa treatments, all charged to the HOA account. The room erupted. Residents shouted questions, demanded Barbara's resignation, called for audits. The meeting devolved into accusations and recriminations until Barbara simply walked out, leaving her stunned board members to face the angry crowd. By Sunday morning, 3 HOA board members had resigned. By Monday, the remaining board voted to remove Barbara as president and hired an independent forensic accountant to audit all HOA finances. By Tuesday, the State Real Estate Commission had opened a formal investigation into Barbara's business practices. Her license was immediately suspended pending the investigation's outcome. But Barbara's problems were just beginning. Her bank, First Mountain Financial, had been monitoring the situation closely. When news of the fraud allegations became public, they sent a default notice on her $2 million construction loan. The letter, which David obtained through discovery, gave her 30 days to cure the default or face foreclosure on all properties securing the loan. That included her personal residence, her office building, and 18 undeveloped lots in Rockwood Highlands. Wednesday brought another bombshell. The district attorney's office announced criminal charges against Barbara: theft, embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy to commit criminal mischief, and witness intimidation. The last charge stemmed from threatening phone calls Barbara had made to Roger Patterson, telling him not to cooperate with my lawsuit. Roger had recorded the calls, and they were damning evidence of Barbara trying to obstruct justice. I watched it all unfold from my cabin, documenting everything while continuing to build furniture and live my life. The valley that had been filled with tension for months suddenly felt lighter. People waved when they drove past my property. Maria's Cafe had a celebratory atmosphere, with locals toasting the downfall of the woman who'd terrorized their community. But I knew the real reckoning was still coming. Barbara's desperation reached new heights. She showed up at my property Thursday afternoon, alone in her Mercedes, looking nothing like the polished businesswoman who'd first driven up my mountain. Her hair was disheveled, makeup smeared, designer clothes rumpled. She stood at the edge of my porch, and for the first time since this began, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. "Mr. Riley," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "please, we need to talk." I stayed in my doorway, phone recording our conversation. "I think all our communications should go through lawyers, Mrs. Cunningham." She shook her head frantically. "Please, I'm begging you. Drop the lawsuit. I'll drop all HOA complaints. I'll leave you alone. I'll sell you properties at cost. Just please, stop this." The transformation was stunning. The arrogant developer who'd threatened to destroy my life was now begging for mercy. But I remembered Roger Patterson's shaking hands, Jennifer Santos's bitter tears, the families driven from their homes. "You had months to make this right, Barbara. You chose intimidation and crime instead. Now you face the consequences." Her desperation turned to anger in an instant. "You're destroying me? Do you understand that? My business, my reputation, my life. All because you wouldn't compromise." I met her gaze steadily. No, Barbara. You destroyed yourself. Every threat, every lie, every crime. Those were your choices. I just documented them. She stood there trembling with rage, then turned and stumbled back to her car, tires spinning gravel as she fled down the mountain. Friday brought news that shocked even me. The state attorney general's office announced they were launching a broader investigation into predatory real estate practices across Colorado. Barbara's scheme wasn't unique. Similar patterns had been reported in 4 other mountain communities. Developers using HOAs as weapons, systematic harassment of property owners, fraudulent loan applications. Barbara had become the face of a statewide problem. The media coverage intensified. Denver news stations sent reporters to interview me. I declined most requests, but agreed to one on-camera interview with investigative journalist Amanda Torres. Her segment aired Sunday evening, featuring my story alongside 3 other property owners from different developments who'd faced similar harassment. The story went viral, shared thousands of times on social media, sparking conversations about HOA reform and developer accountability. Monday morning, I received a call from State Senator Catherine Walsh. She'd seen the news coverage and wanted to discuss legislation to prevent similar abuses. Mr. Riley, your case has exposed serious gaps in our property laws. I'm drafting a bill that would require HOA board members to disclose financial interests, mandate independent audits, and create penalties for harassment-based property acquisition. Would you be willing to testify at committee hearings? I agreed immediately. This fight had become bigger than just my property. It was about protecting rural landowners from corporate bullying, about preserving community character against unchecked development, about holding powerful people accountable when they abused that power. Uncle Thomas had protected this valley for decades. Now it was my turn to protect others facing similar threats. The foreclosure process on Barbara's properties moved forward rapidly. The bank scheduled an auction for 3 weeks out, and the list of properties was staggering. Her personal home, valued at $1,300,000. Her office building, 22 undeveloped lots. 3 rental properties. The total value exceeded $4 million, but she owed so much that the bank expected to lose money even after selling everything. David and I discussed strategy. We could let the auction proceed and potentially bid on strategic properties, or we could negotiate directly with a bank for a settlement that protected my interests while avoiding the uncertainty of public auction. The bank doesn't want to own real estate, David explained. They want to minimize losses and move on. If we approach them with a comprehensive proposal, they might be receptive. Our proposal was elegant. I would purchase 6 key properties at fair market value. The 4 lots adjacent to my property and 2 parcels that controlled access to critical watershed areas. Total cost, $950,000. The bank would recoup significant capital, and I would create a conservation buffer that permanently protected the valley from future development pressure. We submitted the proposal Tuesday morning. While waiting for the bank's response, the community began planning for the post-Barbara era. The new HOA board, led by James Richardson, was conducting a comprehensive review of all rules and restrictions. They discovered that many of Barbara's most onerous requirements had never been properly voted on by residents. Architectural restrictions were being relaxed. Fine structures were being reformed. The HOA was being transformed from a weapon into an actual community organization. Jennifer and Mike Santos approached me at Maria's Cafe one morning with an unexpected proposal. Marcus, we've been thinking, what if we bought back our old ranch property at the foreclosure auction? Use it to start a sustainable agriculture cooperative. Prove that this valley can support responsible development. I loved the idea. The valley didn't need to reject all development. Just predatory developments, responsible growth that respected the land and the community could actually strengthen both. Thursday afternoon, the bank accepted our proposal. The purchase would close in 30 days, contingent on clear title and environmental assessments. David began preparing the paperwork while I arranged financing. My furniture business had been profitable. I had savings, and the value of Uncle Thomas's mineral rights meant banks were eager to lend. Within a week, everything was in place. Barbara's criminal trial was scheduled for October. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and her attorneys were already discussing plea bargains. The prosecution was offering 5 years in prison and full restitution to victims in exchange for her guilty plea to fraud and embezzlement charges. Her pride was preventing her from accepting, but her lawyers knew it was the best outcome she could hope for. Meanwhile, our civil lawsuit was proceeding toward trial. Barbara's insurance company had denied coverage, claiming her actions fell outside policy limits for intentional acts. She was personally liable for damages that David estimated could reach $3 million when, including punitive damages, she had no realistic way to pay. Bankruptcy was inevitable, but we wanted the judgment on record to prevent her from ever working in real estate again. The state legislature began hearings on Senator Walsh's HOA reform bill in late July night. I testified alongside 6 other property owners who'd faced similar harassment. My testimony focused on the specific tactics Barbara had used and how existing laws had failed to protect us. HOA boards wield tremendous power over people's homes and lives. I told the committee that power must come with accountability, transparency, and meaningful oversight. Without reform, other Barbaras will emerge in other communities. The bill passed committee unanimously and moved to the full Senate. It included provisions requiring annual independent audits of HOA finances, mandatory disclosure of board member conflicts of interest, penalties for harassment-based property acquisition, and a state ombudsman to investigate complaints. It wasn't perfect, but it was a strong start at protecting property owners from predatory August brought the property closing. I now owned my original 4,200 acres plus 6 additional parcels totaling 870 acres. The expanded property created a continuous conservation corridor protecting the watershed from future development. I immediately placed all of it under a permanent conservation easement, ensuring that no future owner could ever subdivide or develop it. Uncle Thomas's vision of protecting the valley was now secured for generations. Jennifer and Mike successfully purchased their former ranch property at auction for $530,000, less than they'd sold it to Barbara for. They were already planning the agricultural cooperative, recruiting other families interested in sustainable farming. The valley was healing, transforming from a battleground into a community again. September brought Barbara's plea bargain. Unable to face a trial she couldn't win, she pleaded guilty to 8 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and criminal conspiracy. The judge sentenced her to 6 years in federal prison and ordered restitution of $247,000 to be paid to victims. She would likely serve 4 years with good behavior, emerging in her early 60s with a felony record and no career prospects. Our civil case settled 2 weeks later. Barbara had no assets left, but the judgment created a permanent record of her crimes. She was banned from real estate activities in Colorado for life. Our settlement included one additional provision at my insistence. Barbara had to write personal apology letters to every property owner she'd harassed, acknowledging specifically what she'd done wrong. Small satisfaction, perhaps, but important for the victim's healing. As autumn painted the mountains in gold and crimson, I stood on my porch watching the sunset over the valley Uncle Thomas had protected and I had saved. The nightmare that began with a threatening letter had ended with justice, reform, and a stronger community. Barbara was gone. Her predatory development stopped, and the valley was safe. The community transformation was remarkable. Maria's Cafe became headquarters for the valley's revival. Weekly meetings brought together old-timers and new residents, planning sustainable development that respected the land's character. The agricultural cooperative was taking shape, with 12 families committed to sustainable farming practices. Solar panel installations were going up on properties throughout the valley. The change Barbara had tried to force through intimidation was happening organically, driven by community consensus rather than corporate greed. I received letters from property owners across Colorado, sharing their own HOA horror stories and asking for advice. Some faced situations eerily similar to mine. Others dealt with different but equally troubling abuses of power. I started a website documenting best practices for fighting predatory sharing David's legal strategies and Tom's forensic accounting techniques. The site attracted thousands of visitors monthly, creating a network of property owners supporting each other against corporate bullying. Senator Walsh's HOA reform bill passed the state Senate with strong bipartisan support and moved to the House. The grassroots movement supporting it had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. Property rights advocates, environmental groups, rural community organizations, all united behind comprehensive reform. The bill was scheduled for a vote in November, and early counts suggested overwhelming support. But the story wasn't quite finished. There was still one more chapter to write, one final revelation about Uncle Thomas's legacy and the true extent of what he'd protected all those years ago. A discovery that would explain why he'd been so careful, so strategic in acquiring those specific rights back in to be continued in Part 4. HOA Stories Part 4. The legacy revealed the discovery came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elizabeth Morris, a geology professor from Colorado State University, knocked on my door on a crisp October morning. She introduced herself with academic credentials and an intriguing question. "Mr. Riley, I'm researching historical mineral surveys in this region. Your Uncle Thomas Riley participated in a geological study in 19... I was hoping to access his field notes and survey data." I had no idea what she was talking about. Uncle Thomas had been many things, but I'd never known him as a geologist. Dr. Morrison showed me her research, yellowed documents from university archives showing Uncle Thomas had been part of a mineral exploration team surveying the Rockwood Valley before his land purchase. "He wasn't a geologist," she explained. "He was a local guide and land expert. But according to these notes, he saw something that made him immediately purchase as much land as possible. We spent the afternoon going through boxers in my storage shed, dusty containers I'd never fully explored after inheriting the property. In the third box, wrapped in oilcloth and preserved with remarkable care, we found Uncle Thomas's personal journal from 1967 and 60. The entries were meticulous, detailing his time with the survey team and a discovery that changed his life trajectory. The journal entry from August 14, 1967, was the key. Uncle Thomas described watching the survey team core drilling near what would become my property. The samples revealed something extraordinary. Rare earth elements in concentrations the geologists had never seen outside of China. Neodymium, dysprosium, terbium, all critical for modern technology, all present in commercially viable quantities. The professor told me this could be worth millions, maybe tens of millions. Uncle Thomas wrote in his careful script, but he also said mining it would destroy the valley, the watershed, the forests, the wildlife. Everything that makes this place special would be gone. I asked him what would happen if someone just bought the land and never mined it. He laughed and said that would be the greatest conservation act in Colorado history. Dr. Morrison's hands trembled as she read the journal entries. "Mr. Riley, do you understand what this means? Your uncle discovered one of the largest rare earth deposits in North America. Based on these notes and current market prices, the mineral value could exceed $50 million. And he kept it secret for over 50 years to protect the environment." Her voice was filled with wonder and respect. The journal continued through the following months, documenting Uncle Thomas's careful strategy. He couldn't afford to buy all the land immediately, so he focused on acquiring mineral rights separately from surface rights. He made deals with ranchers who didn't understand the value of subsurface minerals, trading cash and livestock for documents that would later prove invaluable. By March 1968, he controlled mineral rights under nearly 5,000 acres, creating a protective umbrella over the entire deposit. "I've spent $1,200 of my life savings," he wrote in March. "Everyone thinks I'm crazy, buying worthless mountain land. They don't know I'm protecting something irreplaceable. This valley raised me, gave me everything I have. Now I can give something back. The minerals can wait underground forever, but the pristine wilderness can never be restored once it's destroyed." Later entries revealed Uncle Thomas's long-term thinking. He knew the secret wouldn't stay hidden forever. Eventually, technology would improve, exploration would expand. Someone would rediscover what he'd found. So he built layers of legal protection. Development easements, water rights, conservation agreements. Each layer made mining more difficult, more expensive, until the economic calculation wouldn't work, even if someone tried. The final entries, written shortly before his death, were addressed to me. Marcus, if you're reading this, you've probably discovered what I spent my life protecting. The choice is yours now. You could sell those mineral rights and become very wealthy. Or you could continue what I started, protecting this valley for future generations. I can't make that choice for you, but I hope I've shown you that some things are more valuable than money. The silence of the forest, the purity of the streams, the sight of elk at dawn. That's wealth that can't be measured in dollars. I sat on my porch that evening, journal in hand, processing the magnitude of what Uncle Thomas had done. He'd sacrificed potential wealth that would have set up his family for generations, all to preserve a landscape he loved. And now that same choice was mine. Dr. Morrison had already explained the possibilities. Modern extraction technology made the deposit economically viable. Mining companies would pay tens of millions for access. I could be wealthy beyond anything I'd imagined. But I just spent months fighting Barbara precisely because she represented the kind of development that destroyed communities for profit. How could I turn around and do something even worse, trading pristine wilderness for money I didn't need? The answer was obvious. Uncle Thomas had made his choice 57 years ago. I would honor it. I called David the next morning with my decision. I want to create a permanent conservation trust. The mineral rights, the surface rights, everything goes into a protected entity that can never be dissolved or sold. The valley gets preserved forever. David was quiet for a moment, then spoke with emotion in his voice. Marcus, do you understand what you're giving up? We're talking about generational wealth. Your children, their children, set for life. I understand completely, I replied, but Uncle Thomas showed me that some legacies are worth more than money. I'm 42 years old, healthy, running a successful business. I don't need $50 million, but this valley needs protection. Future generations need wild places. That's the legacy I want to leave. David sighed, but I could hear the smile in his voice. Your uncle would be proud. Let me start drafting the trust documents. News of Uncle Thomas's secret and my decision to preserve the valley spread quickly. Environmental organizations hailed it as one of the most significant conservation acts in Colorado history. The rare earth deposit remained valuable, but now it was valuable as a preserved ecosystem rather than a mining opportunity. Dr. Morrison published her findings in geological journals, crediting Uncle Thomas's foresight and sacrifice. The Conservation Trust was structured carefully. A board of trustees including environmental scientists, community representatives, and indigenous leaders would oversee the land. The property could never be sold, subdivided, or mined. Sustainable activities like hiking, wildlife, photography, and educational programs were permitted. The trust would be funded by a combination of my contributions and grants from conservation organizations amazed by the story. Senator Walsh's HOA reform bill passed both houses of the Colorado legislature in November and was signed into law by the governor in December. The bill was nicknamed the Riley Act after our family's fight, though officially it was titled the Homeowner Protection and HOA Accountability Act. Key provisions included mandatory financial audits, board member conflict of interest disclosure, penalties for harassment-based property acquisition, and creation of a state HOA ombudsman office. The law's impact was immediate. 3 HOA boards across Colorado resigned en masse rather than face the new disclosure requirements. 7 property owners filed complaints with the new ombudsman office in the first month. 2 developers abandoned aggressive acquisition campaigns when they realized the new penalties made their tactics illegal. The culture around HOAs was shifting, slowly but unmistakably. Barbara began her prison sentence in January at the Federal Correctional Institution in I received a letter from her attorney in February with a personal note from Barbara asking if I would consider visiting her. After weeks of consideration, I decided to go. The drive took 3 hours, giving me time to question the decision. The Barbara sitting across from me looked nothing like the arrogant developer I'd fought. No designer clothes, no perfect makeup, no confidence. She looked smaller, older, diminished. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." We talked for an hour about her regrets and the valley's recovery. As I left, she said, "Your uncle was right. Some things are more valuable than money." I learned that lesson too late, but at least I learned it. Spring arrived in the Rockwood Valley with an explosion of wildflowers and new life. The agricultural cooperative Jennifer and Mike had started was thriving, with 15 families now participating. Maria's calf had expanded, hiring 2 additional staff members to handle increased business. The valley was growing, but growing responsibly, guided by community values rather than corporate greed. The Conservation Trust officially launched in April, with a ceremony attended by over 200 people, state and local officials, environmental leaders, community members, and even a few former residents who'd been driven out by Barbara's schemes. Roger Patterson gave a moving speech about second chances and community resilience. Jennifer Santos spoke about sustainable development that respects both people and land. Senator Walsh presented a proclamation recognizing Uncle Thomas as a conservation hero. When it was my turn to speak, I stood before the crowd and told Uncle Thomas's story, his discovery of the mineral deposit, his choice to protect rather than profit, his decades of strategic land acquisition and legal maneuvering. His final message to me about true wealth: "My uncle taught me that legacy isn't about what we take from the world," I concluded. "It's about what we leave behind." This valley, preserved forever, is his legacy, and now it's ours to protect. The Trust created educational programs, bringing school groups to learn about conservation, geology, and environmental stewardship. Hiking trails were developed with minimal impact, allowing people to experience the wilderness Uncle Thomas had protected. Research permits were granted to scientists studying everything from rare earth geology to wildlife ecology. The valley became a living laboratory and a testament to one man's vision. My furniture business continued to thrive, now with a story that resonated with customers. Handcrafted in the Rockwood Valley, from sustainably harvested timber, by a craftsman who chose conservation over millions. It became a selling point I never advertised, but customers discovered anyway. Orders increased, prices rose, and I found myself earning more than enough to live comfortably while protecting the land I loved. A year later, I received a letter from Rachel, Barbara's estranged daughter. She'd followed the case and wanted to apologize for her mother's actions. She visited that summer, an environmental scientist from Seattle. "Thank you for showing that another path is possible," she said as we overlooked the valley. We spent the afternoon discussing conservation strategies and the power of individual choices. Her work with nonprofits gave me new ideas for the Trust's educational programs. The second anniversary of Barbara's initial threatening letter fell on a beautiful May morning. I stood on my porch, watching the sunrise over mountains I'd fought to protect. 2 years ago, I'd been terrified of losing everything. Now I had more than I'd imagined. A thriving business, a strong community, a protected valley, and the satisfaction of honoring Uncle Thomas's legacy. David Jung visited frequently, bringing other property owners facing similar battles. My cabin became informal headquarters for the property rights movement in Colorado. We shared strategies, drafted model legislation, and built a network that now protected thousands of acres across the state. I often thought about Uncle Thomas's journal entry, his words about true wealth. He was right. The silence of the forest, the purity of the streams, the sight of elk at dawn, these were treasures that couldn't be measured in dollars. Every morning I woke to those treasures. Every evening I watched the sunset paint the mountains in colors no artist could match. That was wealth beyond anything $50 million could buy. The story of the Rockwood Valley spread far beyond Colorado. Documentary filmmakers, journalists, authors, all wanted to tell the tale of the man who chose conservation over millions. National environmental organizations used it as a case study in successful land protection. Business schools taught it as an example of the difference between short-term profit and long-term value. Uncle Thomas's quiet act of preservation had become a blueprint for conservation worldwide. As I write this, 3 years after Barbara's first threatening letter, the Rockwood Valley thrives. The Conservation Trust protects over 50 to 100 acres. The agricultural cooperative has 23 families. The reformed HOA is a model of fair governance, and the valley remains what Uncle Thomas fought to preserve. A wild, beautiful place where nature and community coexist in harmony. Barbara will be released in another year. Her letters suggest genuine transformation. Regardless, her legacy is clear. She inadvertently catalyzed HOA reform, conservation victory, and community strength. Sometimes villains serve a purpose they never intended. To everyone facing similar battles, document everything. Know your rights, build community alliances, and never underestimate the value of what you're protecting. Properties and HOAs can be weapons in the wrong hands, but they can also be tools for positive change in the right ones. Fight smart, fight legal, and remember that some battles are worth fighting not for revenge, but for preservation. Your story matters. Your land matters. Your legacy matters. Uncle Thomas bought this land in 1960 for $1,200, and a vision of preservation. I inherited it 55 years later and chose to honor that vision over $50 million in mineral wealth. Future generations will inherit a protected valley and a story about choosing legacy over profit. That's true wealth, the kind that enriches not just your bank account, but your soul. The kind that outlasts any building, any business, any fortune. The kind that makes a difference that echoes through generations. The sun sets over the Rockwood Valley tonight, as it has for thousands of years, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Tomorrow it will rise again, over land that will never be subdivided into McMansions. Never be sacrificed for short-term profit. Uncle Thomas made sure of that. I've made sure it continues. And the Conservation Trust will make sure it lasts forever. That's the promise we make to the future. This is the story of how Barbara Cunningham tried to steal a mountain and instead sparked a movement. How greed was defeated by community. How one man's 57-year-old secret became the foundation for permanent protection. And how sometimes the greatest wealth isn't what we own, but what we choose to preserve for those who come after us. It's a story about standing firm when powerful people try to intimidate you, about discovering that you're not alone in the fight, about learning that doing the right thing often costs everything but gives back something priceless, and about the legacy we all choose, whether we realize it or not. The Rockwood Valley is safe. The legacy continues, and somewhere I like to think Uncle Thomas is smiling. Day. End.